Good morning and welcome to today's Toolbox Tuesday. My name is Joanne Davis and I'm a safety advisor here at the SCSA. So I'm going to get my screen up and going and show you what we got for today. Okay, so today our topic is hazard assessment booklets. We do have these hazard assessment booklets here at the SCSA, and we're going to talk about how to properly fill them out. We're going to go over some key elements in the hazard assessment process and how it's done at the field level with workers and supervisors. So this is what our hazard assessment looks like. So before I actually get into reviewing the hazard assessment, let's talk about why they are done and what they are. So a hazard assessment is a systematic process used to identify and evaluate hazards in the workplace. This can be due to conditions or working methods. The purpose of the assessment is to identify the cause and the risk to employees and to implement methods of control to reduce and eliminate these risks. By assessing hazards regularly, we can control and eliminate hazards while protecting employees from the risk at the workplace. Supervisors and workers do work together in identifying hazards in the workplace. They do determine and apply required corrective actions to ensure the safety of everyone. Okay, so this is what it looks like. We are going to go into a little more detail into each section. So first we're going to go in this top section here, and we're going to go over that. So here you have your basic information. You got your title, hazard assessment, and it does say, please complete a hazard assessment at the task location. So you want to be actually where you're going to be working, and you want to do this prior to the start of each task or when conditions change. So this is important that you do it before you do the task, okay? So you want to determine the potential existing hazards to the workers and equipment and establish preventative controls, measures, and determine PPE required as well. You're going to see it in the next section. There's a spot for that. And this is going to be an effort to eliminate injury and damage to property. So here you can have your company or craft. It can be your crew. You do want the date and time. Hub number if you do use those. Project, again, if you're going to be using that. Task location is important. As well as if you're moving around lots, so it doesn't matter where you're working. You want to make sure that you do know your muster points, kind of a review, in case of emergency, where are we going to go? The next section of the hazard assessment looks like this, just below that. And if you see at the top, it says review the items with the crew at the site of the task and check the blocks that apply to the work. So we'll get to that in a minute. In red, right below that, it says critical tasks needs a safe job procedure. Please refer to the health and safety manual. So this is a reminder to you to make sure that if the task and the job you're doing is a critical task that has been identified by the company, that you take the time to refer to the safe job procedure, which is usually found in the manual. If it's one of these specific tasks that's listed, you can, star it, highlight it, circle it. But it's just a reminder to make sure that if any of these are critical tasks for you, you do need to review that procedure. Okay, so this is a checklist to get you thinking of what are some of the things you should be looking at before you start work. Environmental hazards, I'm not going to go through each one, but individually, but you do have environmental hazards, ergonomics, working from heights, and then the activity hazards. So this is the hazards that are created by the actual work that you do. There's access and egress hazards and personal limitation hazards. So this again is just to get you thinking. So if you check these off, you've identified a hazard associated to the task. Don't forget that in the next section, not only do you have to identify it, but you also are going to need a control for things you have checked off. So sometimes people just check them off and they don't realize that, okay, I've identified, let's just say I've identified that I am going to be, working where there is holes in the roof surface, but later we don't identify the control that was put in place. So it becomes ineffective. So it's only step one is to identify. I do want you to take note of the PPE section, the last section there, PPE requirements. So you're going to have your basic PPE, which you should be wearing already. And this is a spot is when you're looking at your job task that you can take a look. Do I need specialized PPE? Do I need anything extra? And again, this is done before the job starts. So maybe you just forgot something. This is a good opportunity. Okay, we do need to make sure we have this. And somebody can go grab that PPE for everybody. As well as the last checkbox there, basic PPE inspected. So this is usually going to be your informal. That means you've gone and done a visual of your PPE that you're going to be using, your basic PPE. And yeah, everything looks good today, check. Okay, but later on, usually you'll have a schedule for doing a formal where you actually have a checklist for each of the PPE to go over. But this is a good way to remember to make sure you do that visual. Okay, next, this is the next section of our hazard assessment. And you can see on top we have priority. We'll get into that in a minute. And then here we have identify the task steps and hazards, and then identify the plan to eliminate or control the hazards, and identify when the control has been completed. So I want to break this down and go into each one again. So the first section we have actually is priority index, but I'll get to that in a minute. I want to start with your tasks because usually you're going to do your priority after you identify them. So your task steps. So what are you doing? So usually the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take a look at your environmental conditions that you're working at. You're going to be looking for slippery surfaces, low lighting. So usually going to be inspecting where you're going to be working, and then go into what you're actually doing that day. Maybe you need to set up ladders, set up tools, and then you would identify, depending on your task, what are the tasks you're doing? What are we doing today? Once you have done that, you want to go in and identify the hazards. This is the next section. So once you have identified the task, think about the hazards associated to those tasks, as well as all the ones that you have checked at the top. Where do they fit in? Obviously, you can put them in down there too as well. And a lot of times people put down the hazard and they'll put the location of the hazard too. You know, if there's a slippery surface, like where is that slippery surface? Right? They may put west side of the building. Okay, so we've done our task steps and our hazards. So now let's go back now that we have identified the task, identified the hazards. Let's take a look at prioritizing our hazards. So that's this first column here. And on the top, we do have this priority index to help you out. So this is where you're going to have your severity, which is how bad is it going to be if it happens, and your probability. What are the chances that it's actually going to happen? And here's a nice little chart to help you explain those. So severity, 1 is immediate danger, which in brackets is like death or disaster. Serious is a major injury or damage. Minor is non-serious injury or damage. And 4 is going to be your negligible first aid or less. It's going to be very, very minor. Your probability, you know, what are the chances of this happening? A is going to be immediate or soon. B, reasonable, probable means eventually it's going to happen. C, remote, it could happen at some point. And D is going to be very unlikely, extremely remote. So with this priority index that we use in this booklet, a 1A is very serious, death or disaster, and it's going to happen immediately or very soon. So you want to make sure that that's a very high risk, that you have very good controls to bring that down to an actual workable level. So you want to go through all your hazards and make sure to prioritize them. And that way you can identify what the risk is for each of those hazards. Okay, so we've done priority index. Now we have our steps, hazards. Let's talk about controls next. So when it comes to controls, we have to discuss what are good controls. So as an advisor, we go and we see, and a lot of times people are confused on what are good controls. So we often go back to the hierarchy controls, which I'm going to show you next. And many of you have probably seen this if you attended any of our classes or a lot of our webinars too, we go through this. So the best control is the top one. That's the most effective. And that is elimination. This is the ultimate control. It will eliminate the workplace condition or act that is actually causing the hazard. However, this is not always reasonable. You can't always eliminate. Some of the things we do have a risk and hazard associated with them. So sometimes we can't always eliminate, but it is our first choice. If we can, you want to eliminate the hazard. Next is going to be substituting. So this is where you're going to substitute maybe a chemical or piece of equipment that is less hazardous for another one that has less risk associated with it. Next, we do have engineering controls. Engineering designs and control measures are made at a conceptual stage of the project. The work environment and the job itself should be designed to eliminate hazards or reduce exposure to hazards. So an engineer control, for an example, would be installing additional lighting, okay? Installing exhaust ventilation, guardrails for fall protection is an engineering control. It's putting a barrier between the worker and the hazard. So those are all examples of engineering control. It's something put in place to kind of separate the hazard from the worker. Administrative control is next. And these controls required commitment from management and the health and safety program. So we're looking at policies, procedures, practices, a lot of things that are on paper are going to be your administrative controls. It could also be a sign, that says caution. That would be administrative control. And then we're going down in effectiveness, as you can see. And the last one is going to be your PPE. These are wearable materials used to protect individuals and workers from hazards. So hard hat, safety glasses, respirators, work boots, for example. There's quite a few different PPE out there. They are often required by legislation, and also we'll have company policies saying they are mandatory. They are also the last line of defense. So they are the least effective. They are there to help you in case everything else fails. So remember that this is your last line of defense. A lot of these controls can be used together. You don't just need to pick one, you can pick more. Obviously elimination, it's gone, but you can pick and use a variety of controls together to control a hazard. So just remember when picking your control to pick the most effective and also use a combination. I do want to go through an example here. So a lot of people identify slips and trips as a hazard on their hazard assessments. However, that is a result of a hazard. It's not the hazard itself. So when you're marking down your hazard, you actually need to mark down why am I falling? Why is this a slip? So the hazard would be slippery conditions. Okay, so caused by ice on the ground. So you want to make sure that you're documenting the right thing on here. And then I have this next one, it says pay attention beside it, because this is where a lot of times I see on hazard assessments when I talk to companies that they are putting down pay attention as a control. Or mind on task or focus on task. However, how do you know if that's actually happening? There's no way to measure if that control is working. So it's a very ineffective control. Like there's no way to measure if it's been done. And so we can do something a little more than pay attention. Having a sign is great. But pay attention is not necessarily going to eliminate, icy service, pay attention. We need a little bit more than that. So let's take a look at this situation, something we can do better. So we're right down the hazard itself, which is icy surfaces, ice on pathways, which could cause slips, trips, and falls. And then I have a few different controls here that can be used together. So here we have laying down that sand. It could be sand, salt that we're going to lay down on our pathways before working. The first thing we're going to do, everybody's going to grab a shovel and lay this down. So this could be your engineering control of putting something down and helping reduce that risk. It may not eliminate it, but it'll help reduce the risk. And then there could be a sign watch for face. That would be an administrative control. And the bottom one is a PPE. We can add some additional devices to our footwear, some cleats to help if we're going to be working on these icy surfaces all day. And this will actually help give a good grip and help with put them over your work boots. So I just want to give you an example of a couple of different controls for something that we're going to encounter lots this winter. Okay, next column. We've gone through everything except for the last column here. Okay. This is control completed. So many people miss this one, or they'll just initial. They may just sign the date, but it says date and time. And it is important because this will actually show a company's due diligence that we are actually putting the controls in place before we do the task. So some of the things are going to be done right after you do your hazard assessment. You're going to go put that sand down. You're going to put the extra lighting in. You're going to set things up before you actually do the task because you're actually going to mitigate those hazards. But maybe it will be a couple hours before another control gets put in place for something else because you're not at that point. You're not at that step yet. So it may not be until a little bit later, but you haven't started that task. So here you want to make sure that you write down the time that control. So if you did your hazard assessment at 7 o'clock and all your controls are in place at 7 o'clock, it's a little bit unrealistic that everything was done simultaneously, right? So you want to make sure you actually write down the actual time you put the control in place for that step. Okay, now we're at the bottom of the form. We're finally made it, almost done. After everything is filled in, this is where you're going to have everybody involved sign off. So it says, do not sign until you understand and agree with the hazard assessment. Review and initial after breaks and lunch. This is to see if conditions have changed. So having one person fill in the hazard assessment, pass around, people sign and not read it is not effective. You're supposed to read it and give your input. So do it as a team, give your input. Maybe you'll identify hazards other people didn't see. Everybody's valuable in this process. So if you're doing this as a team, then participate as a team, and more sets of eyes is better than just one. So workers would print their name legibly so we can see who's actually partaking in this. And after breaks, it's a great idea when you go for a break, you come back to the site, you want to reevaluate. Has conditions changed? Is there a new hazard present now? And an opportunity for sign off. We checked, everything looks good. Or maybe you'll add something to the list. Maybe something has changed. Maybe the weather conditions changed. You never know. And you can also have your contractors, your subcontractors sign off on this. If they're going to be working in the area and they're going to be working with you, have them review it and sign it off. It's a great opportunity. And then at the bottom here, we have the supervisors part of this. So the supervisors should be reading the hazard assessments that workers have completed if they didn't do it with them, and reviewing to make sure that hazard assessments and the controls are actually relevant and sufficient for the hazards that have been identified. Or maybe they missed a hazard and you can discuss it with them and add it to it. This last slide here, this page I found when you go to our website, you can actually get a digital copy of our hazard assessment. And this is on the second page. And it does say auditor review, but this can be who's reviewing the hazard assessments. It could be safety manager back at the office, it could be the supervisor. They are going to be looking for where was the task actually described? Were hazards identified? Were the controls in place? Were all the controls implemented? Maybe we put a control on there, but we never actually did it. And did people actually review after their breaks and lunch? You know, check to make sure everybody's name is legible. Very important. Who was there? Was it actually signed by the supervisor? Did they identify muster points? Did they actually identify tools and equipment expected? That's going to be on the checklist. And did they actually have the task location? So this is an opportunity for whoever's reviewing these to go back and train if necessary and improve the process. So this is a tool for whoever's reviewing the hazard assessments, because they should be reviewed by management as well. Okay, so that was a review of our hazard assessment booklet and how to fill it out properly. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, any concerns on that, just feel free to contact us at the SCSA, and advisor would be happy to help you. And thank you for joining us. I do want to mention that tomorrow we do have our webinar Wednesday at noon. And we have a guest speaker, Marcy from WCB, who's in claims management. So that's going to be some great information and great opportunity to learn more about claims management. Okay. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you tomorrow and next week.